Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the 5 Elements podcast. Thank you once again for joining me for today's episode, I am so excited to announce our newest sponsor, and that is union busting. Now, have you ever had pesky employees that would like their wages to rise with the cost of living so that they don't starve? I know what you're thinking. Grow up. Work harder. That's what I would do. And whenever I have pesky employees that like to say things like, me, the cost of living has gone up and wages have stayed stagnant for decades and the cost of housing, shut the hell up. You know what I do? And this works every time. I throw a little pizza party. Yeah. Little Pepsi, little dipping sauces. I might even get, you know what, to make it a little extra spicy, I'll get a little Hawaiian pizza. And then they just forget. They forget about everything. And then they're debating about this overdone, tacky debate of whether pineapples belong on pizza or not. It's all bullshit. It's a smokescreen, but it works every time. But you know what? One out of 10 times it doesn't. Because some fucking nerd decided reading leftist Karl Marx stuff and then believe that they should live a life of dignity and get paid for the fruits of their labor. And whenever they do that, I always resort to union busting and how some of the greats have done it throughout the years. Recently, Starbucks tried, and we stood with Starbucks trying to bust those unions. Unfortunately, they took an L, and they might have lost the battle, but we will keep on waging the war against giving fair wages to our employees. So, next time you are noticing organizing going around you, bust that union. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get to today's episode, which is going to be with Amy Snelling, who is a personal trainer, online coach, and amazing content creator. We had a wicked conversation, and we did some myth busting because if Amy does one thing spectacular, which she does multiple, and you will notice in the podcast, this has transcended just the fitness industry. She's been all over. She's done all the things. Very interesting story from her, but she's fantastic at busting myths because she really looks at the evidence in terms of fitness in a different way than most just online trainers do. And it's honestly not the job of personal trainers to understand research to the degree that she does. That doesn't mean they shouldn't, but it's not necessarily the job. But the fact that she has done this and she's created a ton of very helpful content, and she delivers it in a way that is aware of how the person reading it is going to intake it and then utilize it for their life. It's not just dry sciencey stuff. It's entertaining and it's helpful. She specializes in some pre-postnatal stuff, and that's kind of where I found her, but she talks fitness myths all the time and busts them very well. So we talked about that. We talked about the myth of core stability. We talked about some pain science stuff. It was a very interesting conversation. And she also just led us into her background a little bit more and how she got to where she is. So you're going to enjoy that. But first off, we're going to start with some roses and thorns as always. Today, I got an easy rose, and it's going to be the fact that on Sunday, and this is going to come out, it's going to come out on Friday, so this is going to come out on time, hell yeah. On Sunday, I'm going to be heading to California for the first time with 2 friends. This is actually real small town, London, Ontario of me. I'm going with my high school quarterback. Hilarious. Going with 2 guys that I've actually played high school football with that I've remained friends with. It's going to be an awesome trip. We're going to do the coast drive from San Fran to LA. We're going to see some scenes. We're going to go to Yosemite National Park for a day. I'm very excited for it. And the reason why this is such a throne, not a throne, that's kind of a mix of both, a rose, is that I never really traveled throughout my childhood and into my young adulthood. It's just something I never did. And it's something I believed that I couldn't do. It's one of those irrational beliefs that doesn't hold a lot of truth in reality, but it's something you hold dear. And I always thought that if I ever traveled, it would financially ruin me. My business would fall apart. And the ironic part is I would spend the same amount of money that I would on a trip just on dumb shit like going to the bar. Like when I was in my early 20s, I'd go to the club and drop money like an idiot and just buy dumb stuff. And I'd buy more things and I wouldn't invest in experiences. And after a while, I'm like, dude, I'm almost 30, and now I am 30, and I haven't traveled as much as I want to. Like, I've actually never left North America, which is going to change this year because I am going to India, where my family is from, for the first time in September with some buddies, and I'm very excited for this. But this year has been a big year for travel to me. I went to New York, I went to Mexico, and now I'm going to California. So some awesome trips, and I'm really excited about that because it's one of those things that the more I do it, the more I realize I can do it. And it might sound silly and benign to some people who traveled a lot, especially if they didn't have the means and they still did. Like, I know people who didn't have money and did it quite a bit because they made it work in some way, especially when they were younger. It's just one of those internal beliefs that I just, for some reason, believed. My mom and my dad didn't really travel. It wasn't something that we did. And it's something I've always wanted to do, but was always really nervous about doing and taking time off work, especially because I don't really get vacation pay. So then it was like, oh my God, this big thing because I work for myself. But I'm like, no, I'm fine. I can do this. So it's like another, it sounds maybe a bit strange, but it's an act of courage for me, at least, to be like, no, you can do it. Everything will be fine. Because I tend to struggle with the idea that like the sky's always about to fall. It never does, and every time that it has, I always land on my feet, but I don't tend to remember that message. And the more times I do things that I've historically been afraid of and just kind of avoided because it made me uncomfortable, the better. And every time I travel, I get great experiences. So I'm really excited. It's going to be a fun-ass trip. I've always wanted to go, and that's kind of it for that. My thorn is just the recurring lesson of you can't do everything, and I have also been doing more things. I've been hanging out with more friends. My social life's been better. I've actually been working a little bit more too on some different projects, which is exciting stuff. But what has taken a hit is some of the personal development stuff that I really like doing. I've still been doing a lot of Spanish, like 2-3 lessons a week, but not as much as I had been doing. I haven't been reading nearly as much. I haven't been able to play music at all. Like, I just haven't had the time to do these things, which I normally do. And that can be very frustrating, but it's a rosy thorn because it's because I'm doing other good things too. And sometimes it's hard to remember. You need to let go of something in order to do something else. And I have this conversation with my clients all the time, but it doesn't mean that I'm impervious to being frustrated by these things where, I tell them how there are certain times in the year where training is going to be awesome and you're going to be dialed in and killing it. And then there's going to be seasons where that's just not the case. And you're kind of going back down to maintenance mode. And that's not the end of the world. You can't be progressing in all facets of your life at the same time, but that doesn't make it not annoying as hell. And I sit with the feelings, and one thing that I've gotten better at is sitting with the uncomfortable feelings and not immediately feeling the urge to change something, right? I think that's a very easy response is, I don't like what's happening, change something immediately. But sometimes it is just, okay, why don't I like it? Is it because I have realistic expectations about what I should be able to do in a day? In this case, yeah. I actually don't need to do anything else differently. I just had to reorganize my plate. And I think sometimes we think we can actually just make our plate bigger. But the plate is the plate. And if your plate's already full, you can't add anything to it. And if you want to add something, you usually got to take something off. And some of the things I've taken an L for me lately are things that I really enjoy, but they had to take a slight back seat. And that's okay. But there's a thorn to it because it's just annoying. It's frustrating when you feel like you're crushing it in something and you got to take a little bit of a step back because other things have popped up. That's sometimes out of your control. Like, the work stuff is good. It's not necessarily in my control because it's stuff I need to do. And that's a positive, but there's always a cost to it and it's easy to forget. So that's my thorn. It's hard to come up with a big thorn lately because I'm just kind of in a really good spot. And also, I've been holding space for the fact that can change, right? It's not always going to be smooth. There's going to be waves. There's always turbulence that comes. That doesn't mean the plane's going to crash, which is a strange thing for me to say when I'm about to hop on a plane in 2 days. So if my plane crashes and I die, this was definitely the bad juju from this recording right now, and I'll take responsibility for that. And aside from that really is my rose and thorn, and let's fucking do it. Let's do this podcast. Let's have the interview with Amy. You're going to really enjoy this one. This one is with Amy Snelling. We're going to be talking about myth busting, core stability, pain science, and then just two trainers shooting the breeze. All right. Cheers. Okay. So Amy, welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
So this is Amy Snelling. I've been following her on Instagram for a while. I've actually been a big fan of the stuff you put out because I talk about evidence quite a bit in terms of having an evidence-based practice with fitness, but anyone can kind of say they do that. And you've been really putting out good work for a lot of years now. Like I think I looked at your Instagram there, like recently, it was like 4,000 posts on it, which is
So,
gnarly.
so that was my personal Instagram account that I made when the app was first released. So
Okay.
I've had my Instagram account for over, or it must be like 15 years easily.
Wow. Okay, wait. Oh, so then you just changed it into a business account and that you're like people can
Yeah,
deal with it.
yeah. So
I did the
like,
same thing and people hated it. I was like, people were
yeah.
like, make a separate account. I'm like, no, I already have followers here. You guys just you'll have to actively unfollow me.
Yeah, it was. I just thought, well, it's me. Like I am my business, so I just sort of transitioned. But if somebody could be bothered to scroll back far enough, they'll find when I used to run a dog creche,
You
and
did
there's
a
just
what?
a dog creche, like a doggy daycare.
That's what you're doing before you were a trainer?
I've done loads of things. So I owned and ran a doggy daycare, and then I was a
Okay.
primary school teacher, and now I'm a personal trainer.
Wow, that's wild. That's a lot of things. That's a lot of caretaking.
Yeah, I mean, it's children and animals, which you're not, not recommended.
I mean, if you have the patience for children and animals, then you're golden.
Yeah, so I sort of fell into being a PT, but the children and animal skills are always relevant, I think. It's about being empathetic and patient and compassionate. So those skills are really transferable. But yeah, it just when I say all the jobs I've done, people go, "How old are you?" Like,
Uh,
how have you done all of these things?
I mean, I assume you just started working really early.
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of. I mean, I went to university, did a degree, and then
Okay, what was
just
the degree in? Because I bet it's going to be even more random. It's just not even going to make any
yeah,
sense.
it is. No one can ever guess. I'll give you three chances to guess what it was in.
All right. I'll go art history first. No. Okay. It was a university degree. It wasn't like a trade or college.
Yeah, university degree.
Okay, okay. Uh economics. All right, I'm gonna pull one out of the left field. I'm gonna say environmental law.
Oh, it was just law.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
I tried to go a little niche with it. Okay.
Yeah, that's the closest anyone's ever come. Like you actually mentioned the word law. Yeah, so I did a law degree.
That checks out because you're very peculiar when it comes to finding evidence. Like you are very specific in how you go about that. Because the thing is, most people in the fitness space don't read evidence. And actually, two of the people that I find very interesting here, I think you actually know Alan Flanagan, right?
Hmm.
Because he was a lawyer first too, and then he became like a PhD in nutrition, and he dissects the evidence in a very skillful way, which I assume him being a barrister before played an important role in being able to dissect that because you're reading dry ass papers as a lawyer.
Yeah, and it's what tends to happen is as well you get this if you can't prove something you can't say it. That's like the sorry if you can hear the dog barking.
Well, you still have your dog business. It
Yeah,
sounds
oh
like.
yeah, I've got my dog business on the side, but no,
Yeah.
just my own very noisy Labrador who
Yeah.
like might have to be told to come in here so that he's quiet. um so I think that's where it comes from. Like if you when you do a law degree or if you've got any kind of background in law, if you can't prove something with a high quality piece of evidence, you just can't say it.
Mm,
And like you were saying, a lot anybody can say evidence based or that they're evidence based now, but people are still not using it in the right way. So like they're taking one piece of like quite low quality evidence because it's not all the same,
yeah.
and then making really like broad sweeping suggestions from it. Whereas actually using evidence is a little bit more complicated than that and takes a lot more time. But like you say, yeah, the papers are dry and sometimes you're like losing the will to live reading like this huge review for it to only say we don't actually know much at the
Oh,
moment, and you're like okay.
it's so funny you say that because that was when I started beginning, I guess, calling myself more evidence based, but getting more into the practice of reading research and trying to apply it to my practice and writing about it. The the way I went about it was I'm just like, I'm gonna write articles and I'm basically gonna try to break down the research that I have access to into an applicable way for people to read it. But what I found when I, especially as I began, I was like, it is so fucking hard to come up with like anything that I'm like without, I guess you never really are without it, without a shadow of a doubt, but like we can say this with the utmost confidence. Because before I didn't know how to say that. So I was even more cautious with my language. And I'm like, I'm saying nothing ever. And there is a skill of being able to discern through evidence and make a judgment call based off the best evidence that we have. And what I do find interesting as someone who's in the field as a personal trainer working with everyday people and you yourself, there is some sort of like experience you can use to fill in the gaps of like, well, yes, this is the best evidence we've had. These are experiences I've had actually working with real people. This doesn't, and there will be experiences you have working with real people that don't go hand in hand with the best evidence we have, because not everyone is an average finding, right? Like there are standard deviations for that reason, and we kind of are all over the place. But best practices for the general public and specific practices for any client aren't always the same. And I see that a lot with people being like, well, the evidence says this, but I did something else and it helped me. I'm like, yeah, but that's not saying that it will specifically help everyone the exact same amount. This is just showing that the best evidence that we have for the most amount of people is going to be X. And that doesn't mean everyone falls underneath it. So I assume for you, coming from law into fitness, which is actually the complete opposite, where you can just say whatever the fuck you want. And honestly, the more unhinged the things you say with the more confidence, the more you're rewarded for it. That must have been interesting for you to walk into this space and be like, whoa, what the hell is going on?
What is what is really cool about, well, not even cool, but like just when you, where it's, maybe it's not cool. It's more like existential and life questioning, but you do your PT qualification and they're very basic qualifications. I mean, I mean, mine, the one I did was from America. It was NASM Premier Global. I don't even know if are they even a thing anymore? I don't know, but they, you do your PT qualification and you sort of, you don't question the information that's in it, and a lot of it is very basic, or it's just commonly accepted as fact. So you go off with all this information with the best intentions, but for those who have no idea who I am or follow me online, I started doing courses with a different personal trainer company called Faster. So they're a UK based company, and because of the sort of things that I were talking about, I found other faster trainers online by accident, because some of the stuff they were saying like absolutely like rattled me. So things that I believed, like there's good and bad posture.
Mm,
They were making posts like, no, that's not right. There is no good and bad posture because people get pain in all different postures. Like, I read some of that stuff and like it really rattled me, because I was like, oh,
mm,
how could they say this when it's completely opposite to, what people are getting taught and the qualifications people are paying for. But instead of like rejecting it, I was like, well, I want to read what you've read that's led you to this conclusion. Where was the information that you have read that has led you to make this post, or to, advise your clients in this way? Like, I don't know, I think it's that, again, it's that drive for like, I need to know the best evidence that there is. Like, if that's out there somewhere, I want it. So instead of like rejecting it and doubling down and being like, you're wrong, I was like, I'm just going to sign up to one of the courses and see what it's like. And the first one I signed up to was the injury recovery course, that started going off into pain science and,
mm.
all of those like amazingly complicated topics. And there was a period where I sort of, like you were saying, I didn't dare say anything then. I was like, everything I think I know
Yeah.
is possibly wrong. And now I daren't do or say anything, because I don't have confidence in anything I'm saying.
Yeah.
Things like you see, we've got Brett Contreras talking about glute activation, and, you've got to do banded clams and all of this sort of stuff to wake up your glutes before you do your glute bridges. And it's like, all of this stuff that I was just doing with my clients in the gym, banded distractions. That's where I found your guitar video with the
Oh,
banded
okay.
distractions. Yeah, someone
Yeah.
shared it and I was like, that's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was doing all of these things to my gym clients, like getting them to do really lengthy activation, pre-activation, pre-activation
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
warm-ups in the gym, like really actually wasting quite a lot of their time, only to discover that there is just not a huge solid evidence base for any of that. And then after doing the injury course, I signed up to the creme de la creme faster course, which is the faster trainer expert, where you are just taught research skills,
Mm.
as the fundamental principle. It's like you can't rely on what other people are telling you. You've got to be able, for your client, you've got to be able to go and find this evidence yourself, and that course teaches you how to do that, and really how to have like a truly person-centered individual approach for like each and every client. And that's what led me to then to write my own course, which is why I'm always, like I say, reading dry ass bloody research papers that are like making me lose the will to live, which then just makes me a little bit mad because I see people posting absolute rubbish,
Yeah.
on a topic that we just don't have enough evidence on. There was there was one example, like people often send me posts that say, oh, this person's quoted research, like, is this right? Like, what's the deal with this? Somebody sent me this post that was about how after a cesarean section, the scar tissue is, and it had a percentage, X percentage weaker, and will never be as strong as, tissue that hasn't been, operated on.
Yeah.
And after going into the reference that was provided on the post, the study was done in like 1950 on rabbits. So,
Oh my God.
like,
Was it closed access too?
no, I don't know. I can't remember. I don't think so. But it was. I mean, this paper was so old that it was just there was like sketches of rabbits in it, not even photographs. Like,
Wow.
and what they were doing in this study on these rabbits is they were trying to test the tensile strength of a stitch, and actually which is the most effective method for stitching. Like, they'd done all different, like crossing over this way, that way, and they only wanted to test like which one held up
Yeah.
to, so they would make the incision, stitch it up, and then they'd take that bit of tissue, put it into clamps, and then slowly apply pressure to see where, each one tore. And they did it over a series of days, to the point like fresh stitch to nearly healed. Like, it's really like,
I love how much you know about this
yeah.
obscure
Well,
1950s rabbit
I
study.
had to read it all.
That's
I
so
had to read
like
it all.
total recall of the entire study right now. That's actually
Yeah,
amazing. But I can tell
yeah,
you, so it's funny. The reason why I found that funny is I've done that before too, where someone has said something and then I'm like, because like whenever I cite research, I know people aren't the average person doesn't have the time to actually go through it, but I want people to, because you can just cite evidence whenever, and if you put a PubMed link beside something, most people are going to think, oh wow, this person did their research behind it, so there must be something true to it. But that's not always the case, because there are a lot of charlatans who will use that tactic, and they might even like citation dump, where they throw so many citations. You're like, okay, this person clearly did their research on it, but that's not necessarily the case. Because I remember there was one case with Andrew Huberman, which this one never like has never left my mind, because I know a lot of people are a fan of his work, and if he brings you value, I get it, that's totally fine. But this just really bothered me in a way where it wasn't. He shared a post about zone 2 cardio where he said someone at a heart health symposium he was at said that if you sit for more than 5 hours a day, it will essentially erase all the benefits you'll get from doing 180 minutes of zone 2 cardio per week. And I remember being like, that literally doesn't even make sense. Like, you're going to get cardiovascular adaptations from doing cardio. I don't know why sitting would largely erase that. That actually just makes no sense on its face. But then someone was like, hey, can you share the evidence you have behind this? And he was on Instagram, and like they're not hyperlinked on Instagram. You actually have to copy.
yeah.
It was in a comment section. He cited 7 papers, and this is when I was my most neurotic. I literally read all 7 papers, and I couldn't get over the fact that literally not one of the papers, only one paper even touched the topic of sitting and its effects on cardiovascular health. And it actually showed the opposite, that doing cardio, if you're very sedentary, will actually help overall health outcomes, like multiple of them. And then the other ones, Amy, were so unhinged. Like, I swear to God, one full journal article was about incorporating a new system in hospitals for having better organizational strategies with staff. Like, it was truly of how to schedule your staff better using a new system, and software. And I'm like, what the fuck? I was like, I don't even think he read, like, and I was like, no one's going to read this. And I actually commented, I was like, hey, here's a breakdown of everything that these papers say. And a few other people were like, dude, I'm reading these now. Like, this makes no sense. And I'm like, and this person is a PhD at Stanford. And I'm like, if it gets that high, like with people with that much credit, like it's such a it can be very, to your point, existential. We're like, what the fuck is happening right now? Because it's just so highly rewarded if that information, because to your point, it's when you really dig into the evidence, the information is not palatable, right? It's not
No.
giving you clear, it's not giving you the most clear instructions for every situation. It's usually watered down and reduced down. And then most people are like, oh, well, I want the simple answer. And I get that impulse. I do that myself in some areas of my life too, because sometimes it's just very exhausting to keep hearing, well, it depends, and context and nuance, etc. But that is kind of how the world operates, right?
Yeah, and like that childlike part of us that's like, someone just needs to tell me what to do.
Yes.
Please. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone just tell me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay,
Yeah.
the first question I wanted to get to, we kind of talked about it, but how did you get to where you are now? Because what I find interesting, as before, the professions you had and coming into this, it actually makes a lot more sense now that we're putting the picture together. But as a trainer, how did you start as a trainer and then get to where you are now? Because I'm always very intrigued by how someone, because to your point, most people start in the fitness industry believing kind of everything they say. Like, I did that for years. Like, it took about 5, 6 years of me being a coach. And then I was like, I know nothing. Like, oh my God, I've
Yeah.
been duped by everyone. I've spent so much money and time spreading misinformation. I'm a bad person. Like, I went through it all. So I'm always curious to how a trainer comes to being more critical of the industry and then kind of actually applying a more evidence-based practice to being a coach, et cetera.
Okay. So I think I had a little bit of a leg up because I came into being a personal trainer having already had quite a bad relationship with exercise and food myself in the past. Like, I mean, the behaviors that I had around food, very disordered, and borderline, like eating disorder territory. I think collectively you would just call them an eating disorder because they were so bad.
Yeah.
Over exercised, just really, really awful, like fully in diet culture, believed that I needed to just like have zero body fat, and that if I didn't earn every calorie, like I didn't deserve to eat. So like, I was in a really messed up place. And then it was through following fitness people and then intuitive eating accounts that I find I got myself into a much better place. And I was still teaching at the time, and then it came to the point where I was going to move house. So for those of you who are not UK familiar, I'm from a city called Nottingham, which is where Robin Hood is from. So normally people know that it what it is. Moved down to Norwich, which if you look at the UK, there's like an arse bit on the side.
Yep.
Norwich is in the arse of England. That's the best place, the best way to remember it. So I now live in the arse of England instead of where Robin Hood comes from. And when I moved down here, I was sort of moving away from my support network, so my parents and friends and everything else, to moved for love. And when I came down here, I said I don't think I want to carry on teaching. Like it's so much stress. Like it's really, really difficult because I then didn't have the support network to help with my eldest daughter, which she was the only child then. Now we've got three. I was like, I need something that's a bit more flexible because long term I'm going to be doing most of the sort of school drop-offs and pickups and things like that. And I was like, I really like fitness. I've come on this huge journey myself. I've always been someone who goes to the gym, who plays sports. You know, I had a little bit of a rough patch where things weren't going quite so well. I've come out of that, and I would really love people now to see that they can enjoy exercise and it doesn't have to be about dieting and weight loss and earning their calories. So I'd already come into it critical of like everyone must lose weight, everyone must
Wow, you started as a trainer critical of that.
yes.
How many years ago was that?
I think 6 now, 5 or 6 years ago.
You were pretty ahead of it there.
Yeah. So I already felt like I was coming in from a different place anyway. And but I still had like I just started following successful fitness people, and they were like, so we'd say Brett Contreras and like other, all like the glute building kind of, like, you've got to women have got to lift heavy weights and they've got to eat more. And I was like, hey, I quite like that message, because it's
Yeah.
not about making yourself smaller, it's not about weight loss. But it still wasn't quite the path that I'm on now. I'd sort of, you have to sort of sway one way to counterbalance where you've just come from, and then you sort of like gradually get to more of a middle ground that reflects like actually who you are. But it was then through doing that sort of really more like centered person approach, not dieting, helping people have a really good relationship with exercise and enjoy it and feel confident and strong in their bodies, that I then, like I said before, found faster trainers, and they were saying some stuff like that was making me feel a kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they were saying your clients' glutes don't need activated, and I was like, what?
Yeah. That will be jarring to some people listening to this, to be honest.
Yeah,
It
like
still
that's
is a very pervasive thing.
yeah, I was a bit like, okay, well, I do that with my clients, and if you're saying that that is wrong, then I want to know why. So yeah, that's when I said sign up to the first course, and yeah.
No, that makes total sense. So yeah, I'll put some of their information in the show notes because I'll check them out too. But what I think I want to do now is, now we've kind of set the table for like what it means to be evidence-based, kind of how you got to where you are now. I want to do some myth busting, because if there's one thing that you're phenomenal at, it's doing some myth busting, and you do it in an entertaining way, which is very important, because as we're talking, the substance of this stuff is not entertaining. There's no way to sugarcoat that, but the way you deliver it can be entertaining. And I find that the people who get that message out, like for example, some of the guys that I just referenced, Stronger by Science and Mass, it's not entertaining. I find it entertaining because I like the content.
Yeah,
But if
I mean, I'm
and
happy to read those as well. Those grids that are just full of words, like I'm
yeah,
happy with those. Like,
but no one else, like
you
my clients will be like, this is holy shit. It's like watching paint dry. So I find that a lot of trainers like you and me, we actually bridge that gap into making it more entertaining and digestible while still keeping the core message there, because it took you being challenged in a way to start thinking about it, right, and reanalyzing. But when you're doing it to a client, you want the same goal of, you want to get the gears turning, but it's a different way that you want to communicate it, because you're not just going to send them a paper. I'm like, what the fuck is
no,
this, right?
yeah.
So you need to deliver it in a way that they're going to be like, oh, okay, this makes sense to me now. So one of the first ones, you sent me one paper that was very interesting. You sent me the paper on the myth of core stability. Now, this one, I've read about this a little bit. I actually hadn't read this paper. I think I've heard people mention it before, because I know it's a pretty big one. And when I downloaded it, it had a ton of citations and reads, which isn't typical for research papers. So I'm like, yeah, this one's been read. If I say the myth of core stability and back pain, a lot of people are gonna be like, wait, what? Like, core stability and back pain they're like peanut butter and jam. They go together, like that's what explains it. And I still get clients to this day. And it's always a challenging conversation to kind of poke at that, because it's so ingrained in a lot of people. And if I'm being honest, other professionals ingrain it a lot. Physios, I find a lot of them ingrain it. Chiros, there's a lot of professionals that are in the space or adjacent to it that even poke it even more. So when we're talking about core stability and back pain, what is the most pervasive myth that you come across in this topic specifically?
So it is that like weak or unstable muscle, like unstable joints or weak muscles cause pain. That's the biggest one. That
Okay. So say I come to you and I'm like, yeah, my back hurts because my core muscles are tight or my core muscles are weak. You'll either get either or. They're too tight, so they're weak. It's just kind of, it's like it's almost playing Mad Libs with your core. Like my core is insert like adjective, and the result is pain. So how do you navigate that? And how would you explain to someone the complicated and like kind of the myth there, maybe the potential grain of truth there, and help them kind of reframe the relationship between core stability and back pain?
so I I often sort of ask them. So I've got lots of clients who use this language, and I think what I've learned along the way is like I'm not going to try and correct what somebody thinks initially. I'm going to use the sessions and, the programming and the experience that they have working with me to prove that I'm right, but it can't come straight away, because what it's like when if you're trying to change somebody's mind and they don't really know you and they don't have much of a relationship with you, it's likely not going to go well at all.
No, not at all.
Because like you say, those beliefs are so ingrained, and from lots of research on pain, not just back pain, but all kinds of pain, like self-efficacy and beliefs about pain can have a huge contributor to that pain. So just believing that their core is unstable or their muscles are weak can worsen their experience of pain. So if I tell them, well, that's not true, they might think that I'm like invalidating their experience of pain and how much it's impacting their life. So normally I ask them, what do you know about pain? Because then I can see like what voices have they had in their ear. So that might be the voice of a doctor or a physio. And that can be useful as well, because depending on, if a client's been told by a physio that they've got weak muscles and that's why they're in pain, that's almost a good thing, because what that physio is saying is like, I actually can't find a reason for your pain. So if I tell you to go and exercise, that's going to be the best thing for you. But they've just worded it in that kind of like lazy way that a lot of people will just understand. Oh, it's weak, it needs to get stronger. A lot of people just accept that as, a thing that will help them get better. And if a client says that, oh, my physio said that it would normally be like some random muscle, like the QL. It's like, how are we measuring if this is weak or not? Like, like, how can you even tell if that's weak? Like, that's so vague and unmeasurable. But what that tells me is like that client's actually they've got no explanation for their pain, and actually moving is going to be a good thing for them, and it doesn't matter what that movement looks like. So if we can make it relevant to their goals and what they want to achieve, then that will be brilliant. So I'll ask them, what do you know about pain? What have you been told about your pain? Just listening, not trying to correct anything. If they say things like instability, that just tells me more about their beliefs. And I will use that language in the session, but I'll say like, oh, I'm going to give you this exercise because this is going to really show you like how strong your core is, and and how capable you are, and all that sort of thing. So I'll use language like that, but I don't try and correct their beliefs straight away. And it's really interesting because I post about this sort of stuff all the time on Instagram, being like, your joints are not unstable. Like, there's a lot about when it comes to pregnancy and postpartum pelvic girdle pain. There's a lot of people online going, your pelvis is out of alignment, it's unstable, and all of this. There's no evidence for that. And I'll post about all of these things, but then I'll still have a consultation with someone who will say, oh, well, my pelvis is out of alignment. And I'm like, okay. Okay, then, like, were you hit by a car? Like, are you okay? I try not to be too like confrontational with the point where they've come to me. Like, I'm going to meet them where they're at, and try and not to like, because I don't want to overwhelm someone by being like, this isn't true, that's not true. Because I don't want them to also have distrust with their medical team, because they might still need to be, seeing their physio or seeing their doctor. And I don't want to create like a hostile, relationship with that. So it's almost me just like trying to infiltrate their beliefs by showing them, you are strong, look what you're capable of, you just needed the right movements, the right environment, the right encouragement. And that's usually my approach and I do sometimes have people who are very clearly worried. Like, I did have a consultation with somebody who they were 8 weeks post C-section, and their doctor said, you've got diastasis recti, you can't lift weights, you can't run, you can't do any of these things, you've got weak core muscles, blah, blah, blah. And they were very visibly worried. So going off that interaction, I was just like, none of that's true, because I knew that for that person, that would put her mind completely at ease. So again, it's when you're just having to watch somebody's body language, the way they're talking about something. And that was visibly upsetting, being told that for that person. So that in that case, I did go, that's not true. There's no,
Yeah.
there is no evidence for that. And then started to just ask her, how do you feel in day to day? Like when you pick up your baby, do you feel like, your body's not with you, or it's, you can't rely on it? And, getting the feedback from her. And I was going, well, that to me demonstrates that your core is strong and doing what it needs to do. And yeah, absolutely hit the gym back, take it easy, start bouldering again, because that was something that she wanted to do. And she did, and it was fine.
Yeah,
So
that's the thing, because sometimes, and I think I saw you made a post about this, but I've seen it before where it's such micromanaging of everything, where people are like, well, make sure you're picking your baby up correctly, or else if you're not picking your baby up correctly, you can blow your back out. And I'm like, I don't, I can't imagine where that would be helpful kind of anywhere, but it's very fear inducing. And it doesn't surprise me that then the people who tend to say that offer the solutions to it as well. Like there is a monetary benefit to creating a lot of fear. And as a trainer, actually, I've had this conversation with a couple of clients where they're like, you know what, I have to keep working with you because if I don't, I'm going to hurt myself. And I'm like, fuck, I hate capitalism. All right. So yeah, like I actually have to go against my business interest there and be like, that's actually not true. Like
yeah.
I've told several clients, I'm like, you can work out without me, dude. Like I don't, it's if it were true, that'd be great for my business. And if I just didn't care to lie to you, that'd also be, but it's, you don't need to be trained with me. I want you to work with me because I'm augmenting your fitness experience. But too many people associate like, okay, so if I don't have perfect form in everything I do, I'm gonna get hurt. And I'm like, well, perfect form actually doesn't really exist. People, I've seen people with just atrocious form never hurt themselves, and I've seen people with the greatest form continuously, like robotic movement, still snap their stuff up all the time. Like it's not actually like the main determining factor of that. And it's just it does seem like when you say that to someone, they're like so confused. Kind of how the first time someone said, "Don't like, but you don't, your glutes don't need to be activated," and you're like, "But I've been." There's a little bit of a sunk cost fallacy. You're like, "I've done this. I've
Yeah.
seen it work. Like it has to work." And it's like, well, and this is bringing it back to what you said before of being able to analyze evidence. Like obviously, you need to be able to analyze evidence when you're reading a paper, but being scientifically literate does transcend reading actual papers because it gives you a framework of how to compare things, which I don't think most people do. And I know I wasn't doing this before. And a great example here is any exercise, and this was actually very common. This was shown in the paper you sent me by Letterman, and it was like basically course specific training compared to nothing or just manual therapy or just like cognitive behavioral therapy was great for low back pain. It was better than non-exercise interventions. You're like, okay, cool. If you just read that without analyzing, okay, wow, core strengthening exercises are good for low back pain. But then the second table was comparing core strengthening exercises to general exercise. And there was no difference across the board. And I'm like, any exercise will generally help with back pain. Like not everyone, but on the average, if you are not exercising and you're experiencing some form of especially non-specific low back pain, like it's not like you actually tore a muscle or you have some sort of like disc issue that's biologically explaining your pain, right? If that's not there and you have experiencing lower back pain from the research I've read, just kind of any exercise is going to help. And, some forms might be better for you specifically, et cetera. But if you don't know how to compare those, you're just going to think, well, core strengthening exercise is the best way to go about it. Where it's like, well, if you just start lifting, like,
Yeah.
and exercising in general and move more, your body is generally going to respond positively to that.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why so many core exercises just really annoy me.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
like we will do core exercises in quotations. So many of the core exercises that people are recommended for things like back pain, for postpartum recovery, just for any kind of like recovery situation, they're all so low intensity and not a very good example of how the core actually functions in the rest of the body. So like
Yeah.
as soon as you lay on the floor, you've taken a few different roles of your core out of it completely. So it's like the best way to train your core is to be upright, stand upright. It loves to transfer loads from high to low. So even if you just like picked up a weight and put it down and then threw it over your head, like that's a great core exercise. Way better than doing a bird dog or
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So and there was another great point in that paper that like if you're trying to do core specific training for a sport, it's like just train the sport,
Yeah.
because by proxy the core will also be doing its very specific role in that. And like you can you can get great things like core momentum trainers which allow you to just really like get reactive with the core, but in different upright drills for like running and weightlifting and things like that, that actually do replicate those movements more, but then challenge the core in those movements. So that was a real eye opener for me. I mean, I do a core class and we never get on the floor, like ever. So
That must be confusing to new participants.
yeah, but at the same time, I'll often get messages from people being like, "Do you know, I hate getting on the floor to do exercise." And I'm like, "Yeah, me too." Like, I'm down there going, "Wow, I need to hoover." Like,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
wow, it's dirty down here. Like, no, I don't want to get down on the floor to just crunch my abs a little bit. I want to rotate and flex and bend and all of the good stuff, throw some weights around and really get into it and really develop the skills. We go on one leg, we do balance stuff, all things that will just challenge the core a little bit more. But then it's more transferable to everyday movements. Like I can't think of anything more useless than like trying to think about form in everyday life. Like
Yeah.
I was talking to one of my clients about this because I was like, if you have young children, don't kill your children. If you have young children, you can't stop to think about form when they're about to like fall off the sofa
Yeah.
or hurt or run and often hurt themselves. Like you have got to be reactive, and the best way to then reduce injury in that situation is actually train yourself to be able to react and lift something in lots of different positions.
Yes.
And I think a lot of the time that seems to land well with the people that I talk to about it. Like, I say we've been taught that like if you don't have perfect form, you'll get injured. But actually the opposite is true. If you can get skilled and strong in lots of different positions
Yeah.
that are not that straight line, you actually reduce your injury risk. And when I explain that to people, they are normally like, that does make sense. So that is one of the things that seems to be a little bit more easy to accept. But I think it's easier to accept when you're talking about lighter loads. So like picking up your kids or your dog or whatever, plant pots, things like that. Whereas then as soon as you put that into a gym context with a heavy barbell, people start to go, oh, are you sure? Like, I'm not sure it applies to this scenario with this heavy weight. But it's like, I try and explain form as like, it's this very individual task specific thing. And when you look at form for like deadlift, squat, bench, it's all designed so that you can recruit the most muscles to lift the
Yeah.
most weight, because that's the aim of the sport.
It's an
Whereas,
efficiency thing.
yeah, so if that's not your goal and you just want to, you want to be old and still able to like, run around with grandkids or great grandkids, or you still want to be able to like, prune your rose bush and all that sort of thing, lift your shopping, then just throw in some weights around in, quite seemingly random patterns is actually going to be really useful. So that is, I mean, that's the basis of like all the classes that I put on online: novel landings, novel lifting patterns. Like it gets a bit weird and a bit
Yeah, just
like,
doing weird shit.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and
No, I mean
and
that's where people get hurt. People get hurt doing weird stuff. And
mm,
then in the gym, they want to simulate that everything is moving perfectly and like everything is in this like robotic sagittal plane where
mm,
things just move perfectly. And I'm like, but people don't really get hurt that way. Like
yeah,
if you could deadlift 300 pounds with the most like your spine is completely neutral, like everything is as like robotic and symmetrical as possible. I'm like, yeah, but then you get pushed one time in the real world and you're on one leg and rotated in a weird ass position, you're holding something like you probably want to train that too if your goal is injury risk management, right? As opposed to like again, if you want to get good at deadlifting, then yeah, you want to apply the most effective deadlift technique for the goal of lifting the most amount of weight. And I have this conversation with clients too, where I actually never use like good and bad form. I'll use like more efficient form for what the task is. So I'd be like, hey, if you want to round your back on the deadlift, that's fine. It's just you're probably not gonna be able to lift as much. And if your goal is to lift as much as possible here, the most effective way is to get that spine as neutral as possible, and then drive through your legs as hard as you can. But if you end up rounding out first and then you're actually using your spinal extensors to lock up the movement, that's you're probably going to be weaker because we haven't spent time doing that. That's actually
Yeah.
just a different exercise. It's not a bad one. It's just with like a Jefferson curl, if you're doing that with 100 pounds, but you're deadlifting 300, your spine hasn't been lengthened and stretched under 300. It's only been lengthened and stretched under 100. That's a injury risk, but it's not because your back is rounded. It's because the tissue is getting rounded with 3 times more load than it's ever been exposed to. But then someone hurts their back doing that, and it'll reaffirm like, oh, you can't round your
Yeah.
back out. I'm like, no. Context matters here. And you basically just did a different movement and you just tripled your load. And if you do that with
Yeah.
anything, your injury risk is going to go up. Like if I curl 20s and I'm like, I'm just going to do 60s today, I might fuck
Yeah.
my bicep up. Like that's a good chance. It's not that bicep.
Straight in.
Yeah, like that's what kind of happens there. But again, it reaffirms that oh the back should never be put under load, because I hear that one the most. I would say is like
Yeah.
the moment some people feel anything in their back, they're like, okay, that wasn't good. And I'm like, well, no, like the back muscles are muscles. Like you
Yeah.
should feel that they're
It's
working.
interesting, isn't it? Because like if you did loads of squats, you'd expect some DOMs and some soreness in your quads. But then if you were doing some deadlifts and some other bits and your lower back was sore, people don't go, oh, my lower back's worked, it's got DOMs. They're like, ow, I've hurt my back. They
Yes.
see it in a completely different way, which then adds to those beliefs. But like lifting, even for somebody whose goal is to lift loads, do the heaviest deadlift ever, there's still benefit of them lifting in some more novel and diverse ways with the
Mhm.
lighter load. Because, like you say, if they slip out of this, more efficient form, then they've been developing the skills to deal with that somewhat, and it might help in that situation. But yeah, if I start listing off all the times I've been injured, it's always been doing like stupid shit at home, like, and nothing to do with exercising at all. Like when I used to run and only lift weights in straight lines, I once really badly pulled this shoulder just leaning over to press snooze on my alarm clock. Just
Yeah. It's always the weird stuff.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
hilarious how that happens.
And it was so bad, like my head was like locked in a certain position. I had to go to school and teach my class like this, and they were like 6 and 7 year olds like all proper laughing at me, like,
Yeah. There's no way they were kind to you about
yeah,
that.
it was so bad. And that was just from the alarm going off, and because I'm right-handed and it was on the left hand side of me, I leant over to do that, and yeah, all of this just contracted in the wrong order. I didn't have the skill for this like cross rotational sort of movement. And it hurt for weeks and weeks, and I was pretty sad. But then that was sort of like, I was then going, why am I getting injured? But it was also like, lack of not getting much sleep. I'm stressed because I'm a teacher. There's like, there's all different reasons, not just the movement that I did, but other contextual factors that would have, made the perfect recipe for me to get injured at that particular moment in time.
100%. Actually, that segues perfectly into a question I want to ask, because I know you've talked about this before, and I find it very valuable. Is like, what do people get wrong about pain, and especially when it comes to like fitness, exercise, and their bodies in terms of movement? Because it is something that I come across a lot with clients, that kind of pathologizing every ounce of pain that they feel in the gym.
So pain is protective. I think that's the best way to think about pain, because it can be such a negative thing. Like it's not very nice being in pain, but
Mm.
pain neuroscience has come so far and is so interesting. So like if people are interested in reading books about pain, like I'll send you some titles. Like most stuff by like Mosley is pretty good. He wrote a book called Explain Pain. They also have Painful Yarns, which is like stories about that help explain pain to people,
Yeah.
to help people manage like chronic pain and pain conditions. Because like most people who get chronic pain, there's no physical cause to it anymore. So then it makes treatment like and managing that quite difficult, because how do you treat pain that doesn't actually have a cause, but it's manifesting in a certain area like the lower back or the knees or anything like that. But in terms of when you're exercising, if you feel a little like niggle in your knee or a little twitch in your shoulder and you're doing some movement, you just need to understand that that pain is a message from the brain that's actually just calculated like 1,000 different things. And it's just letting you know that it's not sure about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you might need to change the way you're doing it, lighten the load, or just, maybe ease off that part of the body for the moment, because it just wants to protect you. And pain doesn't mean that there's tissue damage. So if you do like a squat and you feel something in your knee, pain doesn't mean damage. It doesn't mean you've done anything, physically to your knee. Again, it's just your body's going, I'm not sure about this.
Yeah.
And your brain is just, it's gathering so much information, and those beliefs can be part of that. So if you've got like Uncle Tim who's like hurt his knee during a squat and now he can't squat anymore, and then you squat and your knee hurts, you go, oh, Uncle Tim, he now can't squat because he hurt his knee. And so your brain is sort of processing all of these things, like,
Yes.
and that can then create that one experience of pain. So it's really complex, and it never normally has just one, like, you can never just pin it down to one thing. So anyone who's trying to explain pain away through purely physical or, just one thing, so like the way you move, they just take it with a pinch of salt and just think, it's, if you're having a pain flare up, it's better to think of like all the other things. How well have I slept? Have I eaten enough? Have I had enough recovery of this muscle group before I've trained it again? What are my beliefs around pain? Trying to like think about all of those different things, that is more helpful for trying to understand the pain that you're feeling in any one moment than, just going, I've squat wrong or I've done this wrong. So it's a lot more complicated than that. But yeah, there's some great reading that people can do to like really understand pain a little bit more. And then that only benefits your clients, because you can build their confidence in their body. Like, oh, did your knee just tweak? No worries. Let's see if we just lighten the load and make you happier. Oh, well, let's do some skill development instead, just to make those knees feel more confident. So like you can use all of that to, really enhance their experience of lifting and in the gym and working around pain if they have it.
Yeah. Because it's people often, the moment they feel any pain, I used this word before, but they pathologize. They're like, oh my God, this means X, Y, and Z. And I've even had that myself in the past, where it's almost like there's this expectation that there shouldn't be pain ever.
Yeah.
And as someone who was an athlete when I was a kid, like, ask any athlete. They're like, hey, you feel pain? Like, they'll all say literally all the time.
Yeah.
It's about managing it, because I do a physically intensive sport, and it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be like
Overtraining as well, isn't there?
could be overtraining, especially if they're like younger, you're probably under recovered because you're being a shithead still, like
Yeah.
probably partying a lot. You're doing a lot of things, but you haven't inherently become afraid, and fear isn't the first reaction to pain. Maybe it's annoyance, maybe it's like, I'll work through it. And it's not just you should always work through, but you might have a more flexible approach to the sensation of pain, as where I find that as we get older, we get kind of a little more set in our ways, and you become more, fear becomes one of the first things, especially, and I'm glad you brought that up. If then you've gathered experience from other people or in your own past of, for example, if you're any client I've ever had who's ever had back pain historically, the moment they feel anything in their back, it like goes, they almost get sent back through a time portal to being in that position, and everything about them changes. Right. And it's like, it's very interesting there, because that's going to change their movement. That's going to change their confidence. And I think it was like Lauren Slater, you collab with her a lot. She had one post that I found, and I've used this with so many clients. I found it to be it was funny and it was entertaining, but it was so powerful, where she used the example of being spanked.
Yeah. Sounds like Lauren.
Yeah. And she's like, imagine you're having a fun little orgy party with people you feel safe with. Someone comes behind you and they slap you on the bum, and it hurts. Like, there's an objective amount of physical stimulus you're experiencing.
Mm.
Now imagine you're in a back alley and it's dark, and out of nowhere, someone comes up and hits you with the exact same amount of force. Now, objectively, you're getting the same amount of force on your tissue, and it's giving X amount of stimulus. But the context in which you're experiencing that, one could truly, you might have to go to therapy for one. Like one could truly cause some sort of psychological trauma where you're like afraid of leaving your house and being alone. And the other one might be genuinely pleasurable, even though it hurts because the context of it is now that's like an extreme example, but it was just like just to paint the image of like how a stimulus isn't always going to dictate the risk associated with that stimulus. Your experience and your relationship to that stimulus matters quite a bit. And I
Mm.
find with knees and with backs and hips, like certain areas, the moment people feel a stimulus, they just kind of shut down and they're like, nope, I can't do that. And it creates that negative feedback loop, but then they avoid the movement and they get atrophied in that movement. Their skill gets worse, the tissues get weaker, and then they're actually more prone to higher injury risk, but then that feeds that narrative because they've never questioned their relationship to that stimulus, as opposed to they're just like, oh, felt that my knees, that's not good.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely nailed it there. And there's when you start to think about experiences of pain and like seeing people get injured, you start to see how much sense like this does make when you think about pain differently. It's like when I was a school teacher, kid would fall over on the playground, and
Mm.
like they would be sort of, like they know that they're hurt but they're okay, and then they see the blood.
True.
So
I was,
like,
yeah, that's a good
yeah.
point.
So like they're chill, they know they've fallen over, but then they see the blood and they have like this huge secondary reaction because that's a new piece of information from the brain that they're now, and then they'll feel that pain even more.
Yeah.
Um, so that's like an example. I was also, I mean, I don't know what the equivalent over there is, but over here we have Centre Parks, which is like a holiday village that you can go to that's got like outdoor activities. When I was a teenager, there was the one that we were at had got this concrete stairs, and these guys had been drinking. We weren't with them. It was me and my friend who had been bowling, and we were going to walk back to our little lodge thing that we stay in. And this guy jumped down all of the steps and completely buckled at the bottom. He was drunk. He then tried to get up and couldn't. So we sort of went over to see if he was okay. And he was like laughing and he was like, "Oh, why can't I get up?" And his shin bone was sticking out of his leg.
Okay. And then he saw your
um,
face.
yeah, but we saw it, and then he was like, "What?" And we were like, "No, no, no, don't." And I was like, just this instinct took over me because I didn't know anything about that. I was like, "No, you're fine." I was like, "Just like don't look at it." And I put his jumper over his leg so he couldn't see it.
Yeah.
And this ambulance came, and when the ambulance, one of the paramedics said, "Oh yeah, that's sticking out there quite a lot," because he was so unaware and obviously, nicely drunk.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was like going, "What's sticking out?" And he
Yeah.
had no
Yeah.
idea. And then as he started to get lifted onto the like the stretcher, and his brain was sort of catching up with the gravity of the situation. And then one of his friends said, "Yeah, like your shin bone is sticking out of your leg," and he saw it. Again, huge secondary reaction. Luckily, he was like sort of strapped on the thing then, but the panic just took over. Whereas he'd been sat there quite happily for, like 20 minutes while we waited for an ambulance, like quite calm because he just couldn't see what was happening. So again, new information for the brain, new pain response. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
absolutely, we are fascinating creatures.
Yeah. That is actually it's funny. The moment you started saying that, I was like, oh my God, I know where that's going. Like, because I've done that before, not to that degree, but where like I'm not even realizing like there's a sensation. It's not great, but like I'm feeling good. I don't feel like the fear is such a magnifier of the experience of pain. And it's no surprise to me that a lot of the conversations and communications around fitness is rooted in fear of like, you don't want to do this so you don't hurt yourself. Like, do this so you don't snap this or blah, 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 blah. So I think a lot of people are going into the gym out of fear. Like I've heard that with so many consultations is like, I don't want to hurt myself. Like that's maybe one of the most common reasons people say they want to work with a trainer is like, I just don't want to hurt myself. Right. And then that can feed into when they're on their own that they're going to do everything wrong and hurt themselves. And like they could be doing the exact same form with me as when they're not with me. But I think just me being there and their preconceived belief that like just me being there makes everything safer. Right. It immediately changes how a lot of people behave in the gym. And I don't think that's that's taught, I think, to be honest, because as we're younger, we just play a lot and like you just fuck around, you just make a lot of mistakes, you hurt yourself a lot. And then we get conditioned that like any deviation from ideal is a big risk and we need to manage that. And there's an entire industry of selling that like that. There's a lot of money to be made. And it's not even just a fitness thing. That's just kind of like a world thing. Like fear is incredibly monetizable. And it just seems to be the same thing. So you and I are actually doing a very bad thing for our businesses in a funny way, but it does create a lot more trust because I have a lot of clients now. They're like, oh, I feel like they work with me for better reasons, right? And
Yeah,
I don't want to hold someone captive to continue working with me by exploiting their fear of like, oh, if they don't, then they're gonna be they're screwed, right?
exactly. I mean, we've got both of us got terrible long-term business models, like, like,
We've done planned obsolescence on
yeah,
ourselves.
like the evidence-based version of fitness is so boring. Just move a bit while you can. Doesn't matter what it looks like.
Yeah, I say
Like,
that all the time, and people are like, "Wait, what?" I'm like,
yeah,
"No
it's so
specific
boring.
goal. I'm here to design a specific thing, and I can make it. I'm here to augment your stuff and make it better. But it's not like I'm reinventing the wheel here. Like the biggest thing with working with a coach is support. In my unless they're like if it's different if you're like an athlete and you need like a specific thing, then things get a little more specific. But still, support tends to be the the main value. And I think if we were to like think about it in a scientific way, if you just compare no support to support and the same plan, support's just generally going to win, right? And
Yeah,
like the
exactly.
the
It's
more
like
skill.
it's more who we are as people than actually like the exercises that we're giving anyway. Like the contextual factors that help people are just like us being humans that they can trust and bounce off and chat with and tell their problems to. That is way more important than like whether they're going to do squat or a leg press. Like
Yes,
those
yes,
details essentially don't matter as much as the person that they're with in most cases. A lot of my clients don't even have a specific goal in terms of like lifting X amount of weight or doing anything. It's more that they just want to exercise consistently. They don't mind what it looks like, but they just want to try and fit it in. They're usually like time poor individuals. But I'll just message them a really lovely little, it's usually quite weird or jokey, just like, hey, I bet you're feeling quite shrimpy at the minute, so maybe go give yourself a little stretch and have a little walk. And that forms part of my coaching, is just that like reminder that like, hey, you should move because it does make you feel less shit overall.
yeah. No, that's such a British way to go about it. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Like it makes you feel less shit. Like it's just
Yeah.
I resonated with it deeply, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, I assume you got to get going, right? It's been a
Yeah, I have got a client shortly, so
yeah,
who I will say things to that exact
yeah.
nature to, just make
Eh,
yourself, and I'm usually like caveating it with no worries if not, but you
yeah,
should probably just move a little bit because you'll feel nice after.
100%. Well, thank you for coming on. That was awesome. I think I think I want to have you on again if you want to come on at some point. I feel like
Yeah, I love having a chat.
we barely scratched the surface on it, but I have this every time I interview someone, I'm like, I write down a bunch of questions and I never get past two. And that's kind of, I think I actually only got to one, to be honest. Yeah, I got to one question today, so that's perfect. That's right on brand because it just ends up being conversation, which I prefer.
Cool.
But in the meantime, where can people find you? And what do you offer? Just so I can put
So
that in the show
again,
notes.
like terrible business plan, but I'm only on really one platform. I am a one platform gal. I am just on Instagram. Again, very boring username at Amy Snelling PT. And what do I do? I mean, I do one-to-one coaching, which is it's mostly just like an evidence-based thing. I work mostly with people who are struggling to fit exercise into their lives. They've had a bad experience with exercise in the past, or they've got lots of preconceived ideas about what exercise has to be, should be, what it needs to look like to be effective. I also run a fitness community called the Snack Pass, which focuses on shorter workouts. So the classes are like 10, 15 minutes long.
Oh,
Some
it's
of them are about,
amazing.
yeah, 20 minutes max, like just to really show people. And it's amazing what you can get done in like 15 minutes, really. Like there's been some cardio classes where I'm like, like leaning up against that wall at the end, just like I'm dead. Like that's insane what you can get done. So yeah, my stuff is more about like shorter workouts. I just want people to move and removing as many barriers as possible to that. Yeah, we're anti shit narratives.
Okay, beautiful. Anti-shit narrative is something I can get behind
Yeah.
for sure. Okay, so I'll put all this stuff in the show notes below so people can find you. And anyone listening, I highly suggest giving Amy a follow. She puts out great content. I think you have a Substack as well for anyone who
Yes,
likes to
I
read
do.
articles. As someone who writes articles, I know how little people like to read them, but I know how much work goes into them. So when I saw that, I was like, damn, you're putting out a lot of good stuff. So that's amazing. And we'll be in touch soon. Okay.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me. So
No,
nice to
yeah,
chat in person.
my
Yeah,
pleasure. Yeah,
from banded distractions to
yeah,
in-face chats. Love it.
yeah,
All
I
right,
love it
have
too.
a great
Okay.
day.
See you, Amy.
Take care. Bye.
And that, my friends, is how you listen to a podcast. So shout out to you. A lot of hard work goes into that. I know it's an absolute grind. And I appreciate every ounce of attention that you offer me and just for listening and sticking around. A little bit of housekeeping. If you want to work with me, I will leave some details in the show notes of how you can apply for online coaching. And right now, there's no deal. I don't know why I set it up as if I was about to say there's a deal. There's no deal right now, but you know what? If you like the way that I interview on this podcast, you will like coaching with me because I'll kind of do the same thing to you because I like to get curious. I like to help my clients. So if you're looking for help with your fitness and your nutrition coaching, apply for online coaching in the link in the show notes, and please leave a review because that shit's looking bleak right now. I think I got like 3 5-star reviews because all the old reviews are on the old podcast feed, which I don't have access to anymore. So there's 2 5 Elements coaching podcasts out there. One has like 26 episodes. I think we're on episode 5 or 6 here. So we got to beef up those reviews. So if you haven't done that yet, please do so. And I will see you next time, and have a great, whatever day you listen to this, have just a great rest of that day.